Some characters are evil. Some are brilliant. Mayuri Kuretsuchi is what happens when those two traits stop opposing each other and start working in perfect, unhinged harmony. Because Mayuri doesn't feel like your typical anime villain, nor does he fit neatly into the role of an ally. He exists in a far more uncomfortable space, one where intellect overrides morality entirely. His actions are not driven by hatred, revenge, or even ambition in the way we typically understand it. They are driven by curiosity, pure, unfiltered, and dangerously unchecked. And that's what makes him so disturbing. It is not what he does, but why he does it. Because Mayuri isn't chaotic, he's precise. Every experiment, every mutilation, every grotesque display of control is calculated. He doesn't lash out, he studies, and in doing so he forces the audience into a deeply unsettling realization. The scariest minds aren't the ones that break the rules in anger, but the ones that simply do not believe the rules ever mattered to begin with. Mayuri represents a version of genius that fiction rarely explores this honestly. Intelligence completely detached from ethics, no internal resistance, no buried conscience waiting to resurface at a critical moment, no lingering sense that what he's doing might, in some distant way, be wrong. Instead, what defines him is the absence of that entire framework, as if morality was never installed into him to begin with, allowing his thoughts to move with a kind of uninterrupted clarity that feels almost unnatural when compared to the hesitation that defines everyone else. Where other characters in Bleach and in anime in general might slow down under the weight of consequence, Mayuri accelerates because consequence, to him, is not something to be feared or avoided, but something to be observed, recorded, and if possible, replicated under more controlled conditions. It turns even the aftermath of his own actions into further data points in an ever-expanding system of understanding that has no ethical ceiling and no emotional interference. Most mad scientist archetypes are framed through instability or delusions of grandeur. They are either clinging to a warped belief that reframes their cruelty as necessity, or they are spiraling, losing control of the very forces they sought to dominate, which creates a distance between their intelligence and their actions that allow the audience to separate the brilliance from the horror. Mayuri collapses that distance entirely. He is not delusional, and he is not out of control. His awareness is precise, his intentions are clear, and his methods are deliberate to a degree that makes them feel almost clinical, as though every act has already been mentally rehearsed, refined, and optimized before it ever took place. It removes any sense of impulsivity and replaces it with something far more unsettling: certainty. He doesn't believe he's right. He simply operates as though right and wrong are irrelevant categories, and that removal of moral language strips his actions of the usual framing devices that would otherwise make them easier to process or condemn. This is what transforms his intelligence from something impressive into something deeply disturbing, because it is no longer guided by values or principles, or even personal desire in the traditional sense. It is guided purely by function. Everything becomes a means, and nothing exists outside of its potential to be used, measured, or understood. People cease to be individuals and instead become systems to be broken down, tested, and reassembled in ways that maximize informational output. And suffering, rather than acting as a deterrent, becomes an indicator. Proof that the experiment is producing results, that variables are interacting in meaningful ways, that something new is being uncovered beneath the surface of what others would consider unacceptable. There is no cruelty for cruelty's sake in Mayuri's actions, and that absence of emotional intent paradoxically makes them feel even colder, because it removes the possibility that anything he does is driven by something as human as malice, replacing it instead with a detached curiosity that never questions its own trajectory. And that's where the true discomfort settles in, not in the spectacle of what Mayuri does, but in the realization that his logic, when left unchallenged by empathy or restraint, forms a perfectly self-sustaining system that cannot be easily dismantled. If knowledge is positioned as the highest possible goal, then every action that contributes to that goal becomes inherently justified within his own framework, no matter how grotesque or extreme it may appear from the outside. And because that framework never acknowledges moral boundaries to begin with, it never has to confront them, never has to reconcile with them, and never has to evolve past them. The horror, then, is not that Mayuri is flawed, but in his own closed system, he isn't. He is operating exactly as intended, a mind moving forward without friction, without doubt, and without any reason to ever think about stopping. Where most characters pursue power as a way to assert dominance or protect themselves from vulnerability, Mayuri's relationship with power is far more intricate, rooted not in insecurity or ambition, but in an obsessive need to understand systems at their most fundamental level. This transforms control from a means to an end into an end in itself. For him, controlling is not about winning. It's about eliminating uncertainty, about reducing the unpredictable nature of reality into something that can be mapped, predicted, and ultimately manipulated with precision, turning every encounter into an extension of his own design, rather than a spontaneous interaction between two opposing forces. This is why his presence in any conflict feels so deeply unsettling, because it rarely feels like a genuine clash. Instead, it feels like someone who has unknowingly stepped into an environment that has already been shaped around what they perceive, where every possible outcome has been anticipated and quietly accounted for long before the first move is ever made. His battles, if they can even be called that, function less like traditional confrontations and more like controlled demonstrations, experiments unfolding in real time, where the opponent is gradually stripped of agency as the true structure of the encounter reveals itself piece by piece. Each action taken against him feeds into a larger framework that he has already constructed, meaning that resistance doesn't disrupt his plans, it confirms them, validating the very predictions he built the scenario around in the first place. This creates a deeply disorienting dynamic where the illusion of choice persists just long enough to give the impression of struggle, only for it to collapse under the weight of realization, as both the character and the audience come to understand that the outcome was never in question to begin with. The fear here doesn't come from overwhelming strength or brute strength, but from the quiet certainty that nothing happening on screen is outside of Mayuri's expectations. This obsession with control extends beyond external systems and into his own physical existence, further blurring the line between subject and observer in a way that reinforces his detachment from conventional human limitations. His body is not treated as something fixed or sacred, but as a modular construct, something that can be altered, replaced, or discarded entirely if it no longer serves its purpose. This reflects a mindset that views identity itself as fluid and secondary to function. By applying the same experimental philosophy to himself that he applies to everything else, Mayuri removes the last remaining boundary that might separate him from his work, effectively turning himself into both the scientist and the experiment, a constantly evolving entity that adapts in ways that feels less like growth and more like iterative refinement. This self-directed manipulation adds another layer of unease, because it suggests that there is no stable version of him to understand, only a current iteration that can and will change as needed. As a result, every interaction involving Mayuri carries an underlying tension that goes beyond the immediate stakes of the situation, because it is never just about what is happening in the moment, it is about what has already been set in motion behind the scenes, what variables have been introduced without anyone noticing, and what conclusions have already been drawn before the experiment has technically concluded. The lack of transparency in how he operates creates a constant sense of imbalance, where information itself becomes a weapon, and the true nature of the conflict remains obscured until it is far too late to matter. In this way, Mayuri's control is not just a display of power, it is a form of expression, a reflection of a mind that finds clarity not in chaos or conflict, but in the quiet, methodical domination of every single possible outcome. What ultimately separates Mayuri Kuretsuchi from other disturbing figures in anime is not simply the extremity of his actions, but the complete and unwavering absence of the qualities that would normally contextualize or soften those actions within a human framework, creating a character who does not just reject empathy, but exists entirely outside of its influence. There is no emotional core to appeal to, no hidden layer of vulnerability that might reframe his behavior as a response to trauma or loss, and no suggestion that, under different circumstances, he might have become something else. Instead, what defines him is a kind of internal completedness, a sense that he is exactly what he is supposed to be, operating without contradiction or internal conflict, which makes him feel less like a person shaped by experience and more like a fixed point within the narrative, an embodiment of a particular way of thinking taken to its absolute extreme. This absence becomes even more apparent when examining how he relates to others, as his interactions consistently strip away the assumptions that typically underpin relationships in storytelling, such as trust, mutual respect, or emotional connection. For Mayuri, these concepts are not just unimportant, they are functionally irrelevant. They are replaced instead by systems of control, dependency, and design that ensure compliance without ever requiring genuine understanding. Loyalty is not something that develops naturally over time. It is engineered, maintained through mechanisms that remove the possibility of deviation rather than encouraging alignment. It turns relationships into extensions of his own will rather than exchanges between independent individuals. This has created a dynamic where the people around him are not companions or allies, but components within a larger structure, each serving a role that can be adjusted, replaced, or discarded as needed. What makes this particularly unsettling is the way in which the narrative refuses to offer a clear counterbalance to his perspective. This allows his worldview to exist alongside more conventional moral frameworks without being fully dismantled or disproven. While other characters may react to him with horror or condemnation, those reactions rarely translate into meaningful limitations on his behavior, which reinforces the sense that his approach, while deeply uncomfortable, is also reflective in ways that cannot be easily ignored. This lack of narrative correction creates a lingering ambiguity, where the audience is left to grapple with the implications of a character who is not only unbound by morality, but also unpunished by the systems that would normally enforce it. It raises questions about the relationship between ethics and progress that the story deliberately leaves unresolved. In the end, Mayuri's lack of humanity is not portrayed as a void to be filled, but as a defining characteristic that shapes every aspect of his existence. From the way he thinks to the way he acts and interacts with the world and characters around him. He does not long for connection, nor does he suffer from its absence. He simply does not recognize it as something necessary to him. This places him in direct contrast with characters whose motivations are rooted in relationships, emotions, and shared experiences. This contrast is what makes him so difficult to categorize and, ultimately, so memorable. Because he challenges the assumption that intelligence must be accompanied by some form of emotional depth, presenting instead a version of genius that is entirely self-contained, self-justifying, and completely indifferent to the human cost of its own continuation. Mayuri Kuretsuchi isn't disturbing because he's unpredictable. He's disturbing because he's consistent. There is a terrifying clarity to the way he sees the world. A version of reality where curiosity outweighs compassion and progress justifies everything. He doesn't struggle with who he is, he doesn't question his path, and because of that, there is nothing to stop him. In many ways, Mayuri represents a kind of perfect genius, not in the sense of being admirable, but in being completely unrestrained. A mind that operates at its highest level without the interference of doubt, guilt, or empathy. And maybe that's why he lingers in the mind of so many anime fans, because deep down, there's something far more unsettling than a monster driven by rage. It's a genius who simply sees no reason to stop.